Good morning. Excuse me. Hi, tribe and villagers, and welcome to this week's Positive Parenting Live. And this week, the theme that I've focused on is control, because it's coming up a lot and with the various age groups. So yeah, we've got a lot of 4 and 6 year olds who are doing this and some 2-year-olds, but we've also got some tweens and teens, and it's recognizing that children are all building their own autonomy. They start out with a point of instinct. Their instinct tells them they need to be looked after. And the role that we have as parents is actually enabling them to know that they are okay with themselves. So control, when I hear parents talking about, their child is desiring control, what that presupposes is that they want to do something different to me. And is that really true? Because when I'm saying my child needs control, it presupposes that I feel that they're doing something that I don't want them to do. How does that sit? What if I realized that actually it's not my job to be in control? It's actually my job as the parent to facilitate my child to be empowered. And that doesn't mean that when they're throwing bricks around the lounge room that we're supposed to not do anything, because our role is to guide, to enable them to become a person who's suitable for everyday society. And throwing bricks around the lounge room is not a good and safe way to be. However, underneath that, there is your 2, 3, 4-year-old who's throwing bricks. They're telling you something. And it's our job to actually figure out what that something is. Because we all have a need for certainty. It's one of our 6 core needs. And if you've done any personal development, you've probably heard of Tony Robbins. And the 6 core needs comes out of his work. We all have the need for certainty and uncertainty. They're actually a pair. They're not the opposite. They're a pair that complement each other. And we also have the need for significance and love and connection. And they're also a pair. They're not the opposite of each other. They're complementary. And then we have what's known as the needs of the spirit, which are growth and contribution. And they're things that are why we need to feel validated. It's meeting our need for significance, knowing that we are worthy to be part of our family. And for a kid that's acting out, it can be very easy to get trapped into looking at the behaviour rather than looking at the child. I know, I had one who was very, very challenging to have as a member of the family. And he was a member of the family. And we do love him. And he's 37 and we still love him. He has some behavioural quirks that would be nice if they were different. And we've accepted him as he is because he's our child. And it's the same for you with your child, is accepting them as they are to guide them to who they're meant to be. And it's recognizing that when we've got little kids, they're freaking hard work. They are, because they have no common sense. They actually don't know anything. They arrive with a complete blank sheet. Yeah, they may have some of their own quirks. They may have certain behaviours. They may have certain limitations, either physically, emotionally, developmentally. But they're still meant to be a whole person. They're still meant to grow up to become the best that they can be. And so for us, it's recognising that control is a poor choice in looking at it, because if there's a battle of control, somebody's got to lose. And I can tell you that a child will never lose the battle. They may lose themselves in that battle. And what I mean by that is when they're battling with that and we as the adult in the relationship don't know how to deal with that, what happens is that we actually undermine their need for certainty. They trust us to provide the edges of their world. They trust us to enable them to know how to be at the edges. And we did talk about this a couple of weeks back, is that in our unconditional love, we do need to provide boundaries, but the boundaries need to be to meet their needs, not our needs. And that's a delicate balance. That's a delicate journey to get that right. You know, it's the when we're speaking about how our family influence us or what our family's opinions are. Well, we all have one, an opinion that is, and it's working out, well, okay, for my child, what is in his best interest? Because an opinion is just an opinion. Only we get to make it right. And what I mean by that is only we can agree with it or not. Until then, it's just an opinion. And we'll all have them. And different families have different cultures. It's not even based on ethnicity. Yes, there might be some ethnic lines, but actually it's more about how our family were raised and how they perceive that we're supposed to be. And that's the key, there's all of this supposition about who we're meant to be and how we're meant to be. And in that, we can lose the fact that we are actually individual, and our children each are. And that our role is to actually give them certainty that we can be trusted to enable and empower them. And when they're melting down, in that moment, they're just feeling out of personal control. And at that age, if they're healthy and reasonably neurotypical, they can't do it by themselves, because that skill to self-manage is something that doesn't come in till they're about 8 to 10. That part of the brain, this part up the front, that doesn't begin to mature and be effective until they're about 8 to 10. We've spoken about it before. The legal age of reasoning is 10, because until then, you can't be guaranteed that a child who is neuronormal will actually be able to make decisions. And the more we get frustrated with them, the less able they feel. And that's one of the biggest challenges of all, is that a lot of the time we're frustrated by their mistakes based on our concern about how people will see us. We're afraid of the judgment of others when our child doesn't quite meet the expectations we've set. How does that sit? because they're just the same as us. They just happen to be a less evolved version. And for some of us, and it's something that I'm noticing a lot now, is that I suspect that based on my history, that I had a moderate amount of development suspended at age 6. And it happens to lots of us. It's what creates our poor ability to manage self as we grow older, depending on how our experience was as a child. And for me, the year I was 6 was really traumatic. And I suspect that that's why a lot of my choices as I grew older were limited around that. Now, I didn't behave like a 6-year-old, like, all of the things about being 6, because I'm actually relatively smart, because we got to know this because of my dad's work, and he moved around a lot. We were part of a long-term study that looked at relocation and the effect on IQ. So we had our IQ taken, and we in our family happen to have above average. That doesn't mean that I have every kind of smarts, because actually I have only recently developed emotional smarts. I'm fortunate I'm married to a very emotionally intelligent man. And he needed to be, because he spent the first 30 years of our marriage managing me, who was quite emotionally immature in the way that I dealt with things. And there's lots of us who have that in the world. We just deliver it in different ways. And our IQ management can help to offset some of our limitations. And it's also that it's appreciating that we'll also make some choices based on the immature management skills if we happen to have been through experience that limited us. Because for those who don't know or haven't actually thought it all to its nth degree, is that our lizard brain, our subconscious, its role is to keep us safe. Not happy, safe. So in doing its role, it looks for the exceptions. It's looking for evidence to prove that what it already knows is true. And it's why it's so important with our little kids to actually process with them their emotions, because they can't do it for themselves. And then, the thinking that they've created stays. For me, it stayed until I was 55. And I'd created this behaviour that I had nowhere knew where it come from. It was just a habit that I thought was part of my personality. It wasn't. Yeah, I may have had quirks that led me to that. And it could be the same for you, is that we need to support our children to process their thinking, because they don't have that by themselves until they're about 8 to 10. And if they've come from a background where they don't trust themselves, they still won't process well, because they won't want to make a mistake. And that's where it becomes somewhat challenging, is whether we like it or not, the reality is we create the environment to which our child's thinking is developed. And it's pointless to feel guilty, and it's very pointless to be ashamed, because this knowledge is all new. And we're only just now becoming familiar. It's why I really like the work of Daniel Siegel, because he's actually researching this stuff so that we can understand better. You know, the whole brain child just lit up my understanding, and I've only read it in the last year, but it lit up my understanding about things and the way that I was processing, and also the way that my children had been responding when they were younger. You know, this knowledge is really empowering to get a better perspective, because if we have a healthy perspective of what's going on, we can provide an environment that is empowering and enables our child to become who they are, who they're meant to be. And the unconditional love that we provide them to recognize that, yeah, okay, they're going to make some really dumb mistakes. When we stop worrying about us, which is perfectly natural and is not our role as a parent. Our parent is to be there for our child. And for some of us, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen parents who get overly concerned with enabling their child to feel empowered and give them so much empowerment over and above what their age ability could cope with. And so those kids will melt down. And then the parent thinks, but I'm doing all of this. Yeah, and you've skewed it one way. And then you'll have the parent who wants their child to be very conformist. And so they've gone the other way, that thinks their kid's making mistakes because they're actually expressing who they are. And it's kind of hard to let your kid express who they are, especially when they're perhaps a version that you wish they weren't. And I definitely had one of those until I had to resolve that, you know what, this is who he is. I can support him to become a better version of who he is and accept who he is. And that's what the validation process is. I talk about a lot. Validate, empathize, curiosity. It's really simple. It's spoken about by Dan Siegel. It's spoken about by Brené Brown. It's being able to accept that we're not perfect. And it's why we need to accept that we're not perfect. And it's okay to be human in front of our children. It's appropriate to apologize when we have that moment where we've completely lost it and we be, for a moment, a person that we don't like. Because by allowing our child to see that mistakes are okay actually doesn't make them make more mistakes. It actually supports them to get learning when they do make mistakes. And that's the most valuable gift that we can offer them, is to be okay in stuffing up. It's when we get so worried about doing the right thing that we get fixated into how we're supposed to do it. We get anxious, which is what happens to our children and why they get overly concerned, because they recognize that we're so focused on doing things the right way that must be what we're supposed to do. And so they build up a fear based on our behavior that, what if I don't do this right? It's probably this generation, the kids born after 2000, have the highest level of anxiety in history. And that's a pretty scary statistic. And part of the reason is that in our transition into new age parenting and recognize doing differently, is we are messy. You know, my friend Jodie Thornton, who's the parent coach, she said it looks really messy right now because we're also going through it. So us parents are going through it. It's why it's so important to be okay that, you know what? This didn't work for us. And then was it me? Because our child is actually our best teacher. If we take the lead, and I don't mean them leading, is if we take the clues and cues from them, they can actually help us become the best parent we need to be. Instead of worrying about the woulds and shoulds and coulds and what are other people thinking, is your child is an individual and they need comfort, they need certainty, they need uncertainty, because uncertainty is essential. If our life was always certain, we'd be bored. And you've heard it before, if you've got a child that's 4 or older, if they haven't said, I'm bored, you're either doing amazingly or they're not telling you everything yet. And it's all of the things that our children do are normal. And they're to meet those core needs of certainty and uncertainty. And look, I have a military background. I mean, I come from a military family. And one of the things that I've learned is that in order to create certainty, if you've got a really uncertain world, which is what all children have because it's all new and everything is scary and they're trying to figure out how they fit and how they can be safe. And they take initially all of their cues come from us, their mother, usually, mainly. They're whoever is the carer that spends the most amount of time with them. Most of the time, that's the mother. Well, they take all our cues about how they're supposed to feel from us. So if we're feeling scared or nervous, they actually feel that. So they'll do one of two things. They'll either be scared with us or they'll actually become quiet because they know you don't have the capability to support them. And so if we're having difficulty, it's really important to look after ourselves, get our own mental health sorted, get our own negative beliefs sorted, because our kid takes their energy from us. Until they're about 6, they read much more. It's actually their whole life, but until the age 6, it's really, really highly intense that they are intuitively learning. And what I mean by that is they take all of their signals from us, because initially they have no language. You know, we can talk to them till we're blue in the face. They don't know. Every child, you know, it's so funny, is practically every child in the world has the same initial sounds. You know, they do have the mum, 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 bub, 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 dad, dad, dad. And in Western society, that's become how we describe those roles. In other parts of the world, a Chinese child who's never heard English will still say mum, 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 bub, 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 because it's their mouth learning how to make sounds. And so they're reading us. And that's what I was talking about. They're reading us like a book, highly intuitively. Their life is very empathic, as in, it sure is a gorilla. Our responsibility to heal our wounds so we don't pass them down, because we do pass them down if we don't make a conscious and intentional decision to do things differently. And even if we are someone like me who said, I didn't want to be like my mum, that was only part of the journey to doing parenting differently. And it's not that I dislike my mum, because I actually love my mum. Yeah, she has some quirks and some things that I could wish were different. And for a very long time I did, which made our relationship really, really difficult. And then I accepted her just as she is. Amazingly, we get along much better now that I'm not trying to wish that she was different all the time. And it's the same with our child. It's amazing how much more peaceful life becomes when we stop fighting with wanting our child to conform to some way in order for our life to be easier. We don't even think about it like that. We just think that we're being a parent and that we're supposed to be doing certain things. Well, yeah, we are, but sometimes we overfunction a little too far and we worry about other people's judgment. And so when our child is doing something that isn't quite right, can you imagine what it'd be like if we weren't worrying about what other people thought? Yes, we can be considerate. I'm not saying that we just fly off the handle, because that's equally as immature and equally as childlike. It's saying, well, okay, when the feedback comes is opportunity to reflect, why do I resonate with this? What is it that I need to do? Do I want to do anything? You know, we have a wonderful mum a couple of weeks ago who has a special needs kid. And she wants life to be different, not with her kids. She's absolutely brilliant. But she wished other people would be more thoughtful. The thing is that we're all really self-absorbed. And the scenario she discussed was, I've been guilty. You know, when you're a parent and you see another parent's in with the kids, you think, yeah, that's fine. And then when our kid does something, we rush in and we protect them. Again, it's about us. It's not actually about the other person's child most of the time. Yes, I've met the parents who have no awareness of their own responsibilities, who think it's everybody else's fault and everybody's supposed to look after. But actually, most parents are doing pretty okay. Yeah, there are times when we could all do better. And it's not about how well we're doing. It's not a comparison exercise to other people. It's how far we've come from where we were. Are we becoming a better person? Not better than somebody else, better than who we were yesterday. And sometimes we'll still have a crap day. And sometimes we'll still be so freaking tired that we make really poor choices in the moment. That's still really important to reconnect with our child, because that's part of their certainty. They rely on us to be connected, but the connectedness is about certainty as much as it is about connection. Because our children will always, always love us. They actually don't have judgment. Certainly not until they're adults, in the way that we think. Always, they're there for themselves. And that's actually age appropriate. You know, until they're 18 or whatever the legal age of adulthood where you come from is, our job is to enable them to become the adult to succeed in their life the way that they're supposed to. And they're not supposed to be a surrogate for us to actually achieve our dreams. If your kid is having academic issues, it's got nothing to do with who you are. And if they appear to be lazy, there's not a kid in the world who is actually lazy, They might be afraid. They might be scared of judgment. They might be frozen. They're not actually lazy. And part of it is teasing out what's going on for them, not as an interrogation. And you can do this even with 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, even some 2-year-olds. The quality of the conversation is different because they have different language skills, but you can still have that supporting them to gain the language of what they're experiencing and use it in age-appropriate ways. Is a 2-year-old has about, they're at the baseline. They probably have about 3 to 5 words that describe how they're feeling. What their emotion is. They're at the baseline. And it's supporting them to say, well, okay, you're really angry. I can see you're really angry. And we don't throw bricks when we're angry. We use our words and we say, I don't like this. Or, it's supporting them to learn how to express it in more functional and connected is not really a great word in this instance. It's supporting them to, do it in an ecological way, which means good for them, good for us, and good for the greater good, which throwing bricks, of course, is not. Because it might be fun for them, but it's also recognising, well, what's going on? Because are they angry? Are they just curious? There was this mum recently who was saying her kid was throwing their shoes around. I suspect that as a 4-year-old, those throwing shoes around was because they were filling in time. They weren't bored because they'd found something to do. Yep, not terribly ecological because it wasn't good for everybody. But they weren't mad, they weren't angry, they were just curious. So it's also tipping into, well, okay, what's going on? If you're really curious, this is not the right environment to being curious like that. Because there are other people around, so throwing shoes is dangerous in this environment. And we can go home and we can do this somewhere. It's about learning how to avoid no in a really thoughtful way. Because, no is an easy answer. But boy, does it provide an opportunity for them to butt up against us, for them to melt down. And it's not always going to be a perfect outcome. And that's also part of it, especially when you've got under 10s. You might have to repeat yourself a few times because the younger they are, the more likely you'll have to repeat because they have no ability to transpose that learning into another environment. So even though you've told them not to throw their shoes inside, that doesn't mean that they know that you're not supposed to throw a ball inside. You might need to consider a different way of enabling that learning. And it's likely the younger they are. So if you've got a 3 and a 2-year-old, it could feel like bashing your head up against a brick wall. The thing is that they need significant repetition. It's why you will have seen Frozen 50,000 times, or listened to Thomas the Tank Engine, or read their favourite book, because they love the certainty of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And when you come to terms with that, you can really start to enjoy it. I know when I had a pre-reader, because it only works with pre-readers, to shortcut stories. Because as soon as they get language and they get the idea of the story, you can no longer skip words or pages or anything, because they get used to the rhythm of the certainty of the story. And that certainty of their stories and their pieces like that are how they cope with the uncertainty of development. Because with little kids, every 6 months they're a new version of themselves. Every 6 months. How would you feel if every 6 months you thought differently and felt differently? It's a really challenging thing to be a growing child who also has no ability to reason why it's happening. So they're kind of out in the pond with no safety wings except us. And it's realizing that if we can meet their needs for certainty, they'll cope better with all of the changes that go on. It's why we build routines. Routines are a way of a child feeling and experiencing certainty. And yeah, okay, 2-year-old might not want to clean his teeth. It's not the objection to the teeth cleaning that's the issue, because they're just wanting to be in charge in that moment. And I don't know about you, but I don't like mint toothpaste. And so it's also listening to your child as, well, okay, what is the problem? Is it because they want to do it themselves? Because, boy, you're going to hear that a lot if you've got a 2, 3, 4-year-old, and sometimes older, I'll do it myself. Gosh, I remember even with my child who was about 10, but filling the car. Well, he wanted to do that to feel grown up. But it's actually dangerous because they don't have the skill sets yet to know some of the other dangers. And it's why it's illegal for a child under 16 to fill your car. Did you know that? Because even though they might want to, us, the adult in their world, sometimes needs to say no. It might be for a legal reason, but even those legal reasons are usually for a safety reason. And so I guess my message is that it's got to be trust yourself. It's back yourself that you're doing great work, and there'll be moments where you can do better. Happens at work all the time. We are less hard on ourselves at work than we are with our kids. It's easier at work because we're dealing with adults. Or we could have that voice in the head that's constantly doubting ourselves. It's our kids' worst enemy when we doubt ourselves, because they rely on our certainty for their certainty. We're part of their infrastructure for who they are. And when we can appreciate that and know that we're guiding them and supporting them, and that it's actually truly, really not about us. And that's a really challenging thing, because that's an attack on our significance, which is another one of our core needs. And it's realizing that our child-parent relationship is not where our significance should be met, because that's actually not the purpose of the relationship. Our relationship with our child is not reciprocal until they are adults. And then they're just like every other adult, that you can choose to be friends with them or not. Same with our parents. We can choose to be friends with them or not. There is no obligation. There might be a moral, perceived obligation, but there's no actual legal reason. Or, if you've got parents who are disruptive, then spend less time with them. We can still be respectful and keep the boundary at a distance, especially if they don't know how to respect yours. It's been one of the big journeys with my mum, was her learning as an adult, I'm doing things in my family this way. And it was really uncomfortable for both of us for a really long time. And it's with your parents, if you're having that kind of difficult relationship, you should decide how you want to navigate it. Because a lot of the time, the reason that they do it is because their own significance has a gap. And if you can meet the need, same with the kids, if you can figure out what their need is that they're trying to fill, you can actually you can be the change. That's actually really, really powerful. To realize that in us changing our attitude to the way they're being can enable them to become a better version of themselves, which is what happened for me and my mum. It won't happen in everybody's environment, and it's possible. And sometimes it's just worth the risk to test it out and be prepared that my mum did go through a lot of indignance for a while until she understood we were actually on the same side. You know, I had to be respectful that actually, Mum, thanks for your input and this is the way that we're doing it. Or, thanks, Mum, I'm not 12 anymore. I appreciate your feedback and I've got this. Or, thanks, Mum, because she needed significance. She needed for us to honour her, even though she had no ability to demonstrate how to honour us at the time. Interestingly, as she's felt more heard, she's able to hear us more. And yes, ideally, it would have been the other way around where she led the way. She didn't have the capacity. So it's appreciating that within our 6 core needs, our needs are certainty and uncertainty, and they're a pair. They're a paradigm. You actually need them both. If you live in a really uncertain environment, you need more certainty so that they stay balanced. The more uncertain your environment is, if you lack certainty, you'll feel anxious. You know, it's one of the hard things for kids who are atypical, who don't read situations well. You know, they're anxious because they don't know what's going to happen because they don't know how to read situations. Interestingly, I do know that they can learn. Most children can learn. And as a parent, if we can help our kids to learn what they may not have innately when it comes to people skills, that they have a better road through. And yeah, it may not be the way that we would consider looked good, but that's not the point. It's supporting our child to achieve their best. Not our best, not the world's best, their best. And that's all we can do. And it's a privilege to have the opportunity to do it. You know, whether it's birth child, fostered children, adopted children, our role in their lives is to enable them to become the best version of themselves. And it's meeting their needs the way they need them met, not the way we think they need them met. Because that's often the gap. It's that, you know, I see a lot of, your child needs connection. That might be true. And equally, it might actually be significance. Especially for kids with SPD who may not do well with being touched. They need their significance met because they can't do the physical connection. So there's a really great story in, I'm pretty sure it's How to Speak So Little Kids Will Listen, that explains how you can meet needs in a different way. Because the more you can fill their needs buckets the way they need them to be fed, the easier your journey is. And I'd love to hear how you've been able to grow your certainty-uncertainty match with your kids. And if you have any questions, please ask. And know that, as a fine parent says, Good parents are not born, they're made. And so it means that we have the opportunity to become the person that we want our children to have as a parent. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for all the people who have been on, and looking forward to speak to you next time. Remember, ask questions, otherwise you get to listen to what I want to talk about. I'm happy to cover things that you want to know. So please feel free, and we'll work them into the routine. Your time is very much appreciated, and thank you so much. Catch you next week. See ya.